My parents were Holocaust survivors. My father was in Auschwitz. He lost his entire first family, 8 brothers and sisters. He was left alone in the world because of the Holocaust, murdering every one of his family. My mother is Polish. She lost half her family to Hitler. So I always felt a great need to fight for Jews because of this, because of what happened to the Jewish people. And it also enabled me to understand that verbal violence, verbal hatred, marches, speeches, writings against Jews will ultimately be translated into physical violence. This is something I understood because of my parents' experience in the Holocaust and when I studied the Holocaust. This is something we're not quite understanding well enough. I don't see enough Jewish leaders condemning the Bernie Sanders, the Jamie Raskins, condemning the rallies this weekend in New York, calling for the murder of every Jew and for the destruction of the only Jewish state in the world by calling for from the river to the sea and calling for an intifada against all of us. So my background as a child of Holocaust survivors gave me the fight in me and the motivation in me to fight for our people.
We always say sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. You're saying that's not true.
Words become sticks and stones, ultimately. That's the issue. Words become sticks and stones.
Welcome back to the J100 podcast, brought to you by The Allgemeiner. I'm your host, David M. Cohen. Today's conversation is one that feels as urgent as it is timeless. My guest is Mort Klein, the longtime president of the ZOA, Zionist Organization of America, a man who has spent more than 3 decades on the front lines of Jewish advocacy, fearlessly fighting battles that many others were too timid or too comfortable to confront. Klein's story is as remarkable as it is improbable. The child of Holocaust survivors born in a displaced persons camp, Mort grew up to become a mathematician, a health economist, and a researcher with Nobel laureate Linus Pauling, before pivoting into a life of activism that would reshape American life and policy toward Israel. In our discussion, Mort and I go far beyond headlines. We talk about the enduring lessons of the Holocaust and why words become sticks and stones. We wrestle with the morality and consequences of hostage negotiations, the dangers of rewarding terrorism, and the failure of Jewish leadership to speak with moral clarity in the face of lies and demonization. We revisit the political chess match that led to the U.S. Embassy move to Jerusalem, a story few people know in full, and we examine today's existential threats, from Iran's nuclear ambitions to the growing power of radical Islam in the West, and even the quieter but equally profound challenge of assimilation and intermarriage. This conversation is unfiltered, challenging, and deeply personal. Mort speaks with the rawness of someone who has carried history on his shoulders, with the urgency of a man who believes that Jewish survival depends not on platitudes, but on truth, no matter how unpopular. So whether you agree with him or not, you'll come away with a deeper understanding of the battles being fought not only in the Middle East, but in the halls of power, the media, our campuses, and even within the Jewish community itself. This is Mort Klein on history, on truth, and on the fight for the Jewish future. Let's dive in.
Thanks for having me, and I'm so glad you went from the previous career into this one, where in this one you can do so much good for the Jewish people, and we need people to help us. To help all of us, to help your family, friends, our family, friends, the entire Jewish mishpacha. It's a difficult time.
I realize as you say that we have a lot in common because I studied your career and your trajectory, and I noticed that you started we'll call the for-profit, but an academic sphere and government sphere, and you really had a whole career before you kind of entered the fight, on behalf of the Jewish people. So I guess I have that commonality in terms of other careers that I had as well. So I'm glad we're going to bring our experiences together. Let's start with your personal story. You were born, if I'm not mistaken, in a displaced persons camp, child of Holocaust survivors. Talk a little bit about how that background has shaped your outlook and your leadership style for the many years.
My parents were Holocaust survivors. My father was in Auschwitz. He lost his entire first family, 8 brothers and sisters. He was left alone in the world because of the Holocaust, murdering every one of his family. My mother is Polish. She lost half her family to Hitler. So I always a great need to fight for Jews because of this, because of what happened to the Jewish people. And it also enabled me to understand that verbal violence, verbal hatred, marches, speeches, writings against Jews will ultimately be translated into physical violence. This is something I understood because of my parents' experience in the Holocaust and when I studied the Holocaust. This is something we're not quite understanding well enough. I don't see enough Jewish leaders condemning the Bernie Sanders, the Jamie Raskins, condemning the rallies this weekend in New York, calling for the murder of every Jew and for the destruction of the only Jewish state in the world by calling for from the river to the sea and calling for an intifada against all of us. So my background as a child of Holocaust survivors gave me the fight in me and the motivation in me to fight for our people.
We always say sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. You're saying that's not true.
Words become sticks and stones, ultimately. That's the issue. Words become sticks and stones.
And how does that, in essence, translate? How would you spell that out?
Look, the Holocaust didn't start in 1939. In the early 1930s, the Germans were condemning Jews as scum, as vermin, as destroying our society, as a horror to the entire world. There were rallies calling for the end of Jews, to throw them out. That's where it all started. And education as well, within their own schools in Nazi Germany, teaching how horrible Jews are, even films showing how comparing Jews to rats and such. This prepared the people to accept what ultimately happened to murder Jews, because we were just vermin anyway. It's good to get rid of them. So no, verbal violence is a very serious issue. We have not quite really understood that.
It's a very fair point. It's well taken. When people talk about things and it becomes their reality and they accepted this truth, and then it's not a far step to acting on it, which is basically what you're describing in Jewish history. So thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about your pre-career before ZOA. You were academician, right? You were professor, mathematics, statistics. I'm curious kind of how that, what the draw, we talked a little bit offline about this beforehand, but maybe share with the audience a little bit about what was compelling that role for you and what you maybe enjoyed about it, what maybe you didn't enjoy about it.
Well, look, in my own life, I always loved mathematics. I always hated reading and writing. So I naturally went into math and became both a high school and college teacher of mathematics, higher mathematics in college. And my background was not only straight mathematics, but also biostatistics. That's really mathematical statistics applied to medical research. I ended up working with the greatest chemist who ever lived, a two-time Nobel Prize winner, Linus Pauling. I worked with him for 20 years, helping him design experiments, analyze the data. And by the way, it's taught me something, because this was a man, Linus Pauling, this extraordinary genius in chemistry and physics, really, in all of science, molecular genetics. He had enormous hostility to Israel, which made no sense to me. It made me understand that just because you're a brilliant man or a very smart man, it doesn't mean you're smart and understand everything. He was great in one area, another area he didn't understand anything. When we talked about Israel and he would make hostile statements, we both realized we better not talk about Israel. We won't be able to work together. So it taught me that being very smart in one area doesn't make you smart politically or in other areas. And Pauling was a perfect example of that. And I've seen that in the Jewish world. I see many very smart people, PhDs and whatever, and top lawyers. And when it comes to Israel, they don't understand. Alan Dershowitz, who's a wonderful man, is a perfect example. One of the smartest people I've ever met or dealt with is Alan Dershowitz. And yet, until recently, he was thoroughly in favor of a Palestinian state, wanted to give land away, was against Jews building in Judea and Samaria. He was a very smart guy who didn't understand. So this is something that taught me, working with a great man like Linus Pauling, is that people who are otherwise smart are not so smart when it comes to Israel. And we've learned that very clearly.
Interesting, fascinating point. I understand it a little bit, right? Because a lot of Jews have these like liberal values. They want to be good people, but you have to, it's hard for people sometimes to appreciate that there are lines that need to be drawn, that there's some people that these things just don't apply to. You can even call some people. So that's, I think that's the problem.
Appeasing evil is not being a good person. Ignoring evil, helping those who are evil, is not being a good person. I think it's in the Torah, right, about that.
Right, there's a concept to eradicate Amalek, somebody who behaves in the way of Amalek, that wants to obliterate the Jewish people. You need to obliterate them, right? There's no dispensation to be kind to Amalek, and people were punished historically for being kind where they shouldn't have been.
Look, the whole world is screaming to give more food and humanitarian aid to the enemy Gaza civilians. Enemy Gaza civilians. Are we talking about giving aid and humanitarian aid to the enemy Ukrainian civilians, Russian civilians? During the Iraq war, where America killed over 100,000 civilians, did anyone say a word? The Afghanistan war, tens of thousands of civilians killed. The Iraq war, tens of thousands of civilians killed. Nobody talks about any enemy civilians except when you're able to use that to attack Jews. Caring about Gaza civilians is simply another form of Jew hatred. Because you have to understand, I tell this to people in my speeches, 90% of the Gaza civilians supported for and now support Hamas. 93% supported 10-7. Do I care about people who want to kill me and my family and praise my fellow brothers and sisters who were massacred? No, I don't give a damn about them. No one will say what I just said because it thinks you're not a good person. But these are evil people. And I don't see any demonstrations in Gaza to rescue the hostages, to stop what Hamas doing, to lay down their arms. So that's really.
I think it's very powerful. I've heard people say, and you don't hear it as loudly as you hear people protesting on behalf of the hostages, but I've heard people say, "What about my friends and my family who were murdered on October 7th? Why is nobody listening to their voice in the grave in terms of what happened to them and ensuring that never happens again? Why? Where are the voices on behalf of that? You're certainly one of those voices. It sounds."
Yeah, it's and Israel has not learned even from their own past. Israel, people don't know what I'm just about to say. Israel's released hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of terrorists from their prisons to release some of these hostages, dear Jewish hostages, not understanding when we released 1,027 terrorists for one Gilad Shalit. I'm grateful that Gilad Shalit was saved, but at the expense of releasing 1,027 hostages, 40 of whom became the leaders of Hamas, including Sinwar. So that deal hurt Jews, didn't help Jews. Look, if my brother was a hostage, I want him to clear the prisons to save my brother. Clear the prisons. He's my brother. But a prime minister has to do what's best for the country, not what's best for my family. So we haven't learned that.
Well, I'm just not to push you on this too much, but as painful as that is, your position would be that today, if there are 10 hostages left in Gaza that are alive, so be it. What are we going to do?
No. Well, we have to try. Look, I would agree to 10 hostages for 10 terrorists.
Yeah.
In fact, the Torah teaches us you don't overpay for people who are kidnapped. It's a Torah rule. The Jewish state is violating the Torah rule. And look how wise the Torah is, how many terrorists have come to kill many more Jews than the one Jew we released in Gilad Shalit. And also, of course, we all understand it only incentivizes more kidnappings. It only incentivizes it. There should be no deals on kidnappings except maybe a one-on-one. That's it. We can't incentivize it, or if they see they can get 1,000 terrorists for a few Jewish kidnap victims, they'll just kidnap more of us. It's a terrible mistake. I understand the pressure Bibi's under from families. And if it was my family, I'd be one of them screaming. But the prime minister has to do what's best for the whole country, not what's best for these families whose all of our hearts break for their situation with these tragedy that their dear relatives are enduring.
No, you make very cogent and fair points. And frankly, these points, maybe they're not popular on some level, but they need to be amplified. They need to be voices that are kind of at least create a more balanced equation on these issues. I think it's grateful that you're doing that. Let's talk a little bit. I think after academia, you then pivoted to work in multiple White Houses, if I'm not mistaken. I think for presidents, Jimmy Carter, I was already a young man at that juncture. I was 8 years old when he completed his term in 1980. But you worked for, if I'm not mistaken, for Nixon and Ford?
Nixon, Ford, and Carter.
Nixon, Ford, and Carter. So I don't get to talk to people too frequently who have served in those administrations. So I'd love to hear a little bit your perspectives on Israel, on the American government, on those presidents, and what you learned.
I worked in a whole different realm. Okay. I worked as a health economist. My background's both in economics and mathematics, and I worked in health policy and health economics, working with Medicaid, Medicare legislation. We worked on the national health insurance plans. So it was a completely different field.
Why did you devote your time to those things? Those were your interest areas.
Look, I worked with Linus Pauling for 20 years. What did I do for Linus Pauling? We worked on medical research, nutrition and disease research, how nutrition can prevent and treat diseases. I had a great interest in health and nutrition. So health policy was, because of my background in economics and econometrics, mathematical economics, I wanted to apply that knowledge to health policy to try and do something that will help people improve their health. So I've always had a strong interest in
and that was, in essence, bipartisan, right? Because you work for Democrats and Republicans, if I'm not mistaken.
I was not a political appointee. I worked as a full-time bureaucrat in the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, in the office of the secretary. I worked in the top office of secretary for Caspar Weinberger and David Marshall. No one will remember David Marshall. Elliot Richardson, they were my bosses. but I was a full-time bureaucrat. I could have very comfortably stayed in the federal government and ended up with a very nice pension.
Interesting. I mean, Caspar Weinberger is known to be a pretty rabid and anti-Semitic individual.
But I only dealt with him on health issues.
Did you ever see that? Did you ever see that part of him?
No, I never saw it. I
Really?
never saw it. We never. I was not at that time. I was never that involved with Israel issues. Just wasn't part of my life then.
Like Linus Pauling, we knew what not to talk about. I guess over here also a little bit, we knew what not to talk. Then that's really fascinating. How does an individual who has, I'm imagining you're probably mid-30s, maybe even 40s at that juncture of your life, how do you make such a, I'll call extreme pivot from healthcare and statistician and mathematics to the Jewish world? It seems like a very kind of big jump. By the way, people ask me this all the time. How do you come into the media space from being a lawyer and being a rabbi? Like, it's like apples and oranges. So I'm asking you a similar question.
It's because of my wife.
All good things because of our wives.
My wife is an ardent Zionist, and she's a rational centrist. You know, I don't use the word right wing because truth is not a political position. I want to repeat that. Truth is not a political position. To be opposed to Oslo and Arafat, because that would become a disaster, which it did, is not a right-wing position. It's just the truth. So Rita, my wife, was a rational centrist, and she complained to me that all I'm doing is making a living and figuring out what movie to go to and where to go out to eat. She said, Mort, our people, this is the late 80s. She said, our people are in trouble. The media's against them, late 80s. And you're not using your God-given talents to help our people, which is the most important thing one can do as a Jew. She kept complaining to me. And finally, I began to worry that my wife was going to lose respect for me if I didn't do something promoting Israel and Jews. And finally, but it's interesting. When I asked Linus Pauling, also he's quite fascinating. He was one of the great scientists in the world. And then he went on this rampage to fight for world peace. He ended up with the Nobel Peace Prize.
Really?
And I said, why did you go into this peace work? You're doing chemistry and physical chemistry and molecular genetics. Why would you? He said, it was my wife. She said, your chemistry means nothing if the world is blown up and destroyed. Your work means nothing. Work on peace, ending nuclear testing, ending wars, however one can do that. And that's why he did what he did. And so Rita the same. I thought I was going to, he said, I was afraid I was going to lose respect for my wife, Pauling said to me. I was afraid I was going to lose respect from Rita. The problem was I knew nothing about Israel. I couldn't answer a single question. I mean, I'm a Jew. I wanted Israel to be well, but I couldn't answer any question about what's going on there. So I had to start reading, which I did. Something I never enjoyed reading. So I started reading everything, learning all about it, and I became pretty knowledgeable. And then my daughter came home with a history textbook called The Enduring Vision. I remember it, used in 200 high schools and colleges, the most widely used textbook in the country. I read the section on the Middle East. Every paragraph had one or more anti-Israel lies. Every paragraph. I said this now that with my newfound knowledge, I knew this. I was horrified. I went to the board of Lower Merion High School. When they said any new business, I got up and I made a speech about the terrible textbook, all the lies against Jews in Israel. The Jews on the board after the meeting begged me to not make an issue out of this. You're going to cause more Jew hatred. Stop it. Drop it. The Jews, not the non-Jews. The non-Jews wanted to do something. I wrote a 9-page single-space type letter to D.C. Heath, gave it to the superintendent of the schools of Lower Merion of all the lies and what is correct. And they changed it. They changed it. And this ended up in Jewish papers all around the country. So I did that because of my wife, frankly. Then I fought against an anti-Semitic church in Pennsylvania. I fought against an anti-Israel candidate, Lynn Yackel, who was running against Arlen Specter in 1992. I was given credit by many people for helping Arlen Specter win that election. He was pro-Israel, she was not. And I did many such things. And because I did this on my own. I was not part of ADL. And by the way, I went to Abe Foxman. Yes, I'll say it publicly, to tell him about the textbooks, how so many of them were anti-Israel with lies. And Abe Foxman didn't care. He wouldn't do anything because I wasn't going to do it. I didn't know what to do, how to do it. That's his profession. And he wouldn't do anything. So I did it myself. And because I did successfully so many of these things, a group of people from ZOA came to me and said they want me to run for president. Now, being a president, first of all, doesn't pay. It does now. It didn't pay. And I said, I don't want to be president, and I don't know how to be president. And they said, look, if you run, I think it'll make the incumbent much more of an activist if you run. And I said, but I don't want to be president. They said, don't worry, you can't win. Nobody knows you at ZOA. But we want you to run to motivate our incumbent. Would you do that, Mr. Klein? And I said something a politician will never say. I said, if you promise me I won't win, I'll run. Because I did not want this non-paying job. Well, I
think Trump felt that way the first time he ran also.
So I was elected by 17 votes out of 500 cast, and that's how it all began. But I wasn't paid. People don't know this. I worked full-time without pay for 6 years. 6 years without pay. And after 6 years, I told one of our donors, a significant donor, that I'm going to be leaving. And then why? I said, because I got to start making a living. I'm running out of my own money to live on. And my wife was a teacher. We had her salary. We had savings I made from my earnings. He was shocked and said, well, change the bylaws. I'll get people to increase the contributions to ZOA to pay your salary.
Wow.
That's
what I call real mesirat nefesh, right? Real self-sacrifice.
Well, these were very wealthy people, but so they've really been paying my salary more or less for 25 years. If it wasn't for them doing that, I would have left already.
Fascinating. So you've now been at ZOA at the helm 30 years. That's a nice
32.
32, okay.
I intended to do it for a year or two, but also things kept getting worse and worse, and the board kept asking me to stay. So, and I've run elections. People have run against me, but I've won the elections over these last 32 years.
Tell me, what are some of the accomplishments you're proudest of throughout your tenure?
Well, I'm most proud probably of the fact that we, as I mentioned earlier, we changed Title VI to cover Jews. That leashed all of these lawsuits under Title VI. It allowed Donald Trump to be using Title VI to pressure universities to change their actions and behavior. That was really a major accomplishment that Susan Tuckman, I, and 40 members of Congress, by the leader in Congress, through our efforts that led this fight, Brad Sherman, a liberal Democrat from California, led this effort. People should know that name. So I'm very, very proud of that. Now, we filed the first lawsuits under Title VI. We probably filed more Title VI lawsuits than anyone else, not only against universities, against high schools, against school boards. I'm also very proud, and people don't know this, that I was involved intimately with Senator John Kyle to begin the legislation and support the legislation to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I worked with John Kyle on this. With ZOA, we fervently endorsed this. Do you know, not a single Jewish organization initially endorsed it, saying this is a terrible mistake. It'll cause violence. It'll erode the chances for peace. AIPAC, ADL, AJ Committee, all of them, Conference of Presidents, refused to help us on this. We went to Bob Dole, who was running for president, because we only had 8 members of Congress on the bill out of 100 senators. 8. That's it.
Wow.
It was going nowhere. We couldn't get Jewish organizations, including AIPAC, to do anything, to work with us. They were against it. We went to Bob Dole, who was majority leader and running for president. He said, I'll get on it if you can get the Jewish senators on it. That's what his requirement was, get the Jewish senators. There was a meeting with the Jewish senators, John Kyle leading it. I'll simply condense it by saying not a single Jewish senator would get on the legislation. You hear that? 0. None of them would get on the legislation. There was about 10, 11, 12 senators in the room. They also said the same thing. It'll lead to violence. It'll destroy any chance for peace. We went back to Dole. Kyle convinced Dole that even though the Jewish senators were on it, this is moral and important. And he got on the legislation. When he got on the legislation as majority leader, it went from 8 to 35. It's only 35. And because of that, there was an article in the Washington Post. AIPAC got involved. They became afraid that we're going to get credit for this potentially very important bill.
Yeah.
So they got involved. We're glad they got involved to help us to get members of the Senate. And it did pass 347 to 37. What it passed? Something like 367 to 37, something like that in the House, and 93 to 5 in the Senate. Overwhelming. Bill Clinton didn't want this bill. He didn't veto it because he saw we had like 80, 90% of both houses. So he refused to sign it. Bill Clinton did not sign this bill. It became law because after 30 days, if a bill is not vetoed, it becomes law automatically. He let it become law without his signature. People should know that. But unfortunately, one of the senators put a poison pill in the legislation. The poison pill was that there's a security waiver. If you think this might be dangerous security, you don't have to move the embassy. Mm. And who is the senator who put that in? Dianne Feinstein of California, with the help of her top aide, Dan Shapiro. You know the name Dan Shapiro?
Yeah.
He became ambassador from the U.S. to Israel under Obama.
Right.
So 2 Jews put a poison pill in not to move the embassy. And then there was what's known as a colloquy on the Hill of John Kyle and Bob Dole speaking, saying, look, this should not be invoked more than once or twice. only for serious security issues, not just because you don't really want to move it. And yet it was ignored. Every single president, Republican and Democrat, vetoed, refused to move the embassy, invoking that clause until Donald Trump. After 18, 20 years, Donald Trump finally moved the embassy. None of the others would do it. In fact, I asked in a meeting I had with President Bush, the younger Bush, I said, it's the law. Are you going to move the embassy? Mort, I can't do that. That'll screw up the peace process. Those are exact quotes. I can't do it. It'll screw up the peace process. And of course, he did not move it.
Why do you?
So those are the two.
Yeah.
I guess many others, but
No,
those
of
are the two
course.
that are most
That's an incredible one. I'd love to peel back the curtain a little more on this. I already learned a lot of things I never knew before about it. I'm really fascinated by this. It was 2017 that it was finally moved. I'm trying to.
Yes, I believe.
I imagine you were there in person when they opened the embassy.
I was in Israel in the audience. Yes.
To explain just how you felt watching that transpire.
I felt thrilled that this was the moral right thing to do. This is Israel's capital. I felt, look, we mentioned Jerusalem 700 times in our holy books, never mentioned the Quran. It is not, that's another thing we should be saying. We don't say. Jerusalem is not holy to Muslims. It's not in the Quran. When they controlled Jerusalem from 48 to 67, did they make it their capital, Jordan? It was a slum. They did nothing with it. It was falling apart. They built everything in Amman, not in Jerusalem. So I felt this is the right thing to do, and I felt very proud for the small part I had to do with this. I felt, in my heart, I felt very, very proud. Of course I did.
What do you think enabled President Trump ultimately to implement what was really American law, yet every predecessor was able to do it?
I have to give enormous credit to two people, to the best of my knowledge. I don't know everything. To the best of my knowledge, Sheldon Adelson was a huge factor. Sheldon was a huge donor to Trump, friends with him. And Sheldon, look, I'll tell you, Sheldon met with Trump at the condos, what is it called? Trump Tower, between November and January. He wasn't president yet. He met with them then. How do I know that? I was in Poland on the invitation of the Polish government, meeting with the top officials there. My phone rings while I'm at dinner in Poland, and it's Sheldon Adelson. And he says to me, Mort, I just left Donald Trump's office. I want you to know he promised me he's going to move the embassy during his term. So Sheldon Adelson was a big factor. He deserves enormous credit for this. And the second is Mike Pence. The vice president is an incredible lover of the Jewish people and Eretz Israel. And he was a big factor in pushing Trump to move the embassy. And Trump himself, look, many of his sons are married to Jewish women. His daughter's an Orthodox Jew, married to an Orthodox Jew. So he thought this was the right thing to do. And Donald Trump is one tough guy, and he doesn't mind doing the right thing, even if it's controversial. He told me before he did this, he had call after call. He actually said this at our dinner. We're the only major Jewish group, that honored Donald Trump and thanked him for what he's done for Israel. The only one. And he told us that before he moved the embassy, he got so many calls from world leaders saying, don't you do this. This is a terrible mistake. There'll be violence. It'll ruin any chance for peace. All the same stories. He said he finally told his secretary, any world leaders, heads of countries, call me in the next week. Tell them I'm tied up. He said, I don't want to hear from. I know what they're calling. And then he said after they moved the embassy, then he called them all back. The ones with messages, call me, call me, call me. He said, hi, this is Donald Trump. You called me last week. What is that you wanted? And of course, they had nothing else to say because they were calling about the embassy. So even though the whole world was against it, much of the Jewish world was against it, Donald Trump did it. This is a strong man who does have principles in many areas of his life, even though people condemn him otherwise. I would say Sheldon Adelson and Michael Pence were major factors. Sheldon, he called me in Poland to tell me Trump promised him.
Interesting. What do you see the differences between Trump 1 and Trump 2 so far in terms of the versus vis-a-vis really the issues that we're most passionate about? Let's frame it that way.
Look, the initial cabinet he had in his first term were very bad people, bad for Israel, bad for America. He was inexperienced. He relied on advice. He didn't really know much. And the second term, he's experienced, knowledgeable. He has many more connections now. He knows has many more contacts, knows what he wants to do, and he's been doing it. It's been the most productive 6 months, maybe the first 6 months of any presidency, maybe in history. He also knows he's not going to run again. So he's not worried about trying to do things that'll be best for him politically. Although I think the things he's doing is best for him politically, but that's no longer a constraint. And he's actually put together a cabinet that's the most pro-Israel cabinet, I will argue, in the history of America. or certainly in history since Israel was recreated in 48, the most pro-Israel cabinet.
Well, I mean, Marco Rubio is certainly leading the charge. Who else in the cabinet?
Pete Hegseth, incredibly pro-Israel. He wants to rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount. He wants to rebuild it. He's gone to Judea and Samaria many times and supports the Jews' the right to live there. I mean, for God's sakes, he says himself, we Jews, we are Judeans. Jew is a contraction of the word Judean. That's where we're from, Judea and Samaria. Palestine is a phony term that was given to that area by the Romans to stick it to the Jews, no longer called Judea, to call it against the Jews' biggest enemy, the Philistines. That's why the Romans renamed it Palestine. It's Philistinia against our arch enemy. And there's never been a Palestine in history. There's no country named Palestine. That's something Israel has to make more clear.
Only David Friedman likes to say that Mike Huckabee is more religious or more adamant about Judea and Samaria than he is.
Well, let me tell you, people have said to me, Mort, aren't you upset that President Trump, who you know, did not appoint you to be ambassador to Israel? I said, yes, I am upset.
Were you in the running? Were you in the running?
Well, I don't know if I was in the running, but the question is asked of me since I was a known supporter of conservatives. Are you upset? I said, yes, I am upset, but I ended my becoming upset when I found out that he appointed somebody more pro-Israel than me, Mike Huckabee. I said I was no longer upset.
No, that's great. That's great. That's great.
I used to speak. Mike Huckabee would bring several hundred Christians to Israel every year in February, and I was usually one of his speakers. So I'm very close to him. In fact, I gave Mike Huckabee the first Dr. Miriam Sheldon Adelson Defender of Israel Award 25, 30 years ago. He got the first Adelson Award at our dinner.
Fascinating. Great stuff. Great stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the 12-day war, if we may. I'd love to hear your perspectives. Were you surprised that America kind of partnered with Israel in terms of the B-2 bomber and kind of helping finish off that, those attacks and that the preemptive strikes from Israel? Where do you see things right now? Are we this? Just I'd love to hear your perspectives on it.
I was not surprised that Trump got involved to try and harm at least their nuclear facility and nuclear program, because Donald Trump understands. This is very important. Israel tries to make this more publicly clear. Iran's war is against the West, not just Israel, but against America. Remember, their rallies almost every week, they chant death to America, death to Israel, death to America first. America's the big Satan, Israel's the little Satan. First the Saturday people, next the Sunday people. Do you hear this? First the Saturday people, next the Sunday people. In fact, Mahmoud al-Zahar, the head of Hamas, a few months ago did a podcast. I don't think it was with you, but he did another podcast, Mahmoud al-Zahar, and he says, I want the world to understand. First, we're going to kill all the Jews. Says it openly. We're going to kill all the Jews. But after that, we're going to kill all the Christians. He says it in his podcast. Why isn't that in the front page of every paper in America? Imagine if Bibi said something as outrageous.
New York Times must have missed that one.
Somehow. So President Trump understands this is a war against non-Muslims and against the West. This is a war to establish an Islamic caliphate for Islam to rule the world. So he knows when he goes and attacks Iran, it's to America's interest and the Western civilized society's interest, not just Israel. But I was concerned and still upset that he apparently stopped Israel after 12 days from continuing the war. The war objectives were not fulfilled, best of my understanding. Khamenei's still there. You have to do all you can to get rid of this regime. As long as they're there, they'll work to rebuild their nuclear facility and cause havoc to the world and to Israel. And so our situation with Iran is not done. Bibi has been publicly stating, calling on people to go to the streets and get rid of this regime. But I was sorry that Trump pressured Israel to stop the war after 12 days before the regime was eliminated.
Interesting. So where do you see things standing at the moment in terms of the nuclear program? It's been set back, I guess, a little bit, a lot of it.
Well, the experts tell us it's been set back for between 3 and 4 months to 2 years. So who knows? But it's not been set back forever, so they can rebuild. And now the nuclear scientists that are left, Israel killed a dozen or more of them, are going all sorts of different places, so it's harder for Israel to get at them. So Iran remains a danger. It's a reduced danger. The danger has been mitigated, but not ended. And this is a very serious issue. Remember, they're the ones that fund and give the missiles to Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. Wow, I might add in this, we Jews should understand that in the last 2 years, we've had incredible miracles that are extraordinary. Who would have believed 2 years ago that we would have degraded Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. It's inconceivable that could have happened. This has to be from God. When I give speeches and I mention this, I say it's enough to make you keep Shabbos and keep kosher and late tefillin. I said, because there's no way this could have happened without Hashem's help. It's too incredible. I always thought to myself, how can Israel hit Iran? They'll get 100,000 missiles from Hezbollah and Hamas. They're in an impossible situation. And look what happened. Hamas and Hezbollah are defanged, and Iran is largely defanged. So this is a miracle. It only strengthens my belief in Hashem, and the fact that these extraordinary miracles have happened.
Mort, tell me where you were on October 7th, and tell me what your initial thoughts were when you began to hear the reports that was happening.
I was in shul davening
In Philadelphia.
in Philadelphia.
It was Simchas Torah, right? It was a Jewish holiday, so that makes sense.
Yes.
So when you got a grasp of what really was transpiring, what were you thinking?
I thought to myself, first, of course, the understandable horror and anguish and misery I felt as a fellow Jew, as a Jew. And I thought, of course, secondarily, how could this have happened? How does Israeli intelligence not know when they've been training for years, possibly? And we don't have the monitoring devices. To this day, I can't answer that question, how they didn't know. And thirdly, I thought to myself, I wish I was successful in being the only Jewish group, ZOA, that fought against the Gaza withdrawal. Do you know there was a vote in the Conference of Presidents? And we've had 2 votes, maybe 3, 32 years. I was asked by Malcolm Hoenlein and Jim Tisch to debate Mort Zuckerman in front of the whole conference. Mort Zuckerman was in favor of the Gaza withdrawal. I was opposed. We had the debate, and to show you what a brilliant debater I am, we had to vote 50-1. The only organization I convinced to vote against it was my own. Every Jewish group voted against it. I'm talking OU, Amit, Jinsa, Camera. Everyone was in
favor. They're all in favor.
In favor of the Gaza withdrawal.
Why was there a vote? I mean, what was the purpose of a vote within the conference? Mm-hmm. They have no authority. They're not deciding. So what was that?
No. That none of us have real authority. We send our opinions and try to influence the media.
It's just establishing what the opinion of was, and you're saying 50 out of 51 were
because there was pressure on the conference by most of the Jewish groups to come out supporting it, the withdrawal. And a decision was made. I wasn't involved in it. Let's have a real vote. Let's have a discussion, a vote to endorse it, to give it even more power. Because in Israel, there was lots of people against it. And here, every single Jewish group voted, either didn't vote or voted to support throwing 10,000 Jews out of their homes in Gaza and northern Samaria. Not a single group but us voted against it. And I got up after the vote and I said, I want everyone to understand, you will all rue the day sometime in the future for voting to support throwing these Jews out. It's going to make things worse, not better. And I was very surprised that Malcolm Hoenlein urged everyone to vote for it.
There was a vote. If there was a vote today, would we get 25-25?
I think most people understand that this was a terrible mistake because had the Jews remained in northern Gaza, Jews were only in 15% of it. People don't know this. 85% of Gaza was given away by whom? Who gave away 85% of Gaza? Bean. Oslo was called Gaza, Jericho first, right? That's what it was called, Gaza, Jericho first. Rabin gave away 85% of Gaza, only the northern part, next to the Mediterranean where the Jews lived. So Gaza mostly was given away already. But had the Jews not been thrown out of their homes, ruining their lives in so many cases, 10-7 couldn't have happened. So I thought that. And then I thought, this is an opportunity to destroy Hamas. This is an opportunity. I hope and pray Israel takes this opportunity to destroy Hamas. I was shocked for a month. Israel did almost nothing. And finally, after a month, I've been told there was pressure by the Biden administration not to respond. And finally, Israel, under maybe internal pressure, I'm not sure, responded. Do you remember Biden came to Israel within the first week of the response and said, we support Israel. And everyone praised Biden, saying, look at the man. He comes to Israel within a week of the war and is with us. No. When he got off that plane on the tarmac, before he went anywhere, on the tarmac, he said, it makes it clear now. I know people remember this. We need to establish a Palestinian state. Do you remember that he said that?
No, I don't. He said that.
People don't remember it. On the tarmac, he said, imagine, a few weeks earlier, 1,200 Jews were massacred, raped, and tortured. And now he wants to reward them with a state. That's why he came to Israel, not to back Israel, to pressure Israel to establish a state. That's why Biden went there.
Yeah, so I like you to take us a little bit behind the curtain. Like you were describing a little bit before about some of the political machinations in terms of moving the embassy and getting Jewish senators on board and couldn't. Explain to me how the president of the United States shows up. What's going on behind the scenes in the administration that he would say something like that? Like, do they not understand the realities on the ground? What are we missing? I don't get it.
Why would Biden say that?
Yeah.
I've known Biden for 30 years. I've lobbied him forever. We even honored him once at our dinner, I regret to say. He was never a great friend of Israel. He voted for aid, yes, but his staffers who I lobbied were among the most hostile to Israel I've ever lobbied of anyone. That's who Biden is. And Biden also was in the Obama administration. Do you think Obama would have had as a vice president someone who was an ardent pro-Israel guy? He would never have him because he'd have fights with him all the time. Because Obama was the most anti-Israel president we've ever had, ever. And of course, Biden was a little out of it. And there's no doubt in my mind that Obama and others, Valerie Jarrett, were really running the show. And so they were letting Biden know what they wanted to do. That's my opinion.
Well, so by the way, just to put back on that a little bit, like, so who sends Biden to Israel? Like, why did he show up?
Look, I was not there behind the scenes, but clearly it was the people who were running the show who told Biden, go to Israel. This is a chance to start movement toward a Palestinian state. That is what I believe. Nothing else makes sense to me. Look, Biden was withholding arms throughout the whole war. Remember, Israel didn't go into Rafah for 3 months into Rafah.
Oh, that for sure. I remember clearly, right?
Because Biden was
pressuring the maps. I remember, yeah.
I'm saying, don't go into Rafah. It'll be a disaster. Biden.
And by the way, so it's an intractable situation. How does Israel finish the job here? I mean, what's your perspective?
Look, we have a pro-Israel administration who understands this is a war against the West. This is a time for Israel to be able to do more. Trump has said Israel should do what they need to do. It's up to them. He said it publicly. Mike Huckabee this week said, if Israel wants to build an E1 between Ma'ale Adumim and Jerusalem, it's their business. Let them build there. But this is what Israel should be taking full advantage of, an administration that understands the Islamic Arab war against Israel in the West and will give Israel the freedom to do what needs to be done. Because what Israel is doing in fighting, they're fighting against the radical Arabs and Islamic radicals, is good for the United States of America and all of Europe, frankly. So this is a time for Israel to go for it.
The challenge is, I think we have the support of called the non-Jewish world, and we don't have the support of the Jewish world, it seems to me.
I'm sorry, we have the support?
We seem to have the support of our allies, and at least America, not other allies.
America.
But we don't seem to have the united support of the Jewish world. See, every day, hundreds of thousands of protesters in Israel to end the war. Now,
not only Israel. Well, let me tell you something. Behind the scenes, in February, we met with Gideon Sa'ar in Israel, all the Jewish organizations. I was there, of course. Gideon Sa'ar, the foreign minister, begged us to, as soon as possible, come out publicly opposing a Palestinian state. We're under pressure to give land away and even establish a state. This is in February. Please come out publicly. We, of course, have always been opposed to a Palestinian state, so, of course, we reiterated our stance against it. Do you know, not a single Jewish group that I'm aware of in the Conference of Presidents, including the Conference of Presidents, despite the demand and urgent request of Gideon Sa'ar, has come out against the state, including OU, B'nai B'rith, AJ Committee. Ted Deutsch wrote an op-ed, the head of AJ Committee, supporting a Palestinian state in the past year after 10/7. Dennis Ross, a Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Dennis Ross, who was one of the peace processors all along since Oslo began, came out with an op-ed after 10/7. We need a Palestinian state, and Abbas should be the head of it. Even AIPAC, on their website, continues to support the so-called two-state solution, a Palestinian state. In fact, AIPAC regularly, with legislation affecting Israel, will put in a phrase, we support the two-state solution. Not a single Jewish group except ZOA has come out against a Palestinian state. It's a painful mistake. And that includes the Orthodox groups.
I think something you said very early in our conversation is resonating with me now, in the sense that I think maybe you would argue, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that words have consequences. I might push back at you at first and say, well, say whatever you want, it's not happening. But you might say to me, David, you're misunderstanding, because as we said earlier, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will ultimately hurt me. If you keep talking about a two-state solution, you are at some level bringing it into closer to reality. Would you say that?
Of course, that's true. We've now had many of the larger countries now urging a Palestinian state, rewarding terrorism, and not only rewarding terrorism, it's more importantly, and we don't say this enough, it's our holy land, given to us by God in the Bible, given to us under the Balfour Declaration, the League of Nations, the United Nations Resolution 181. This is our land. And by the way, I think I have it here. The San Remo resolution passed that all of this land is Jewish land. The Lodge and Fish resolution, the UN Charter, Article 80. The UN Charter, when the UN was formed, Article 80, quote, prohibits the UN transferring rights over any part of Palestine to a non-Jewish entity. It's against international law.
Yeah.
And yet, do you ever hear our Jewish leaders here or in America ever say that? It's against the law. That's one of the reasons that has been established. 140 countries have already said we support a state, but it hasn't happened. It's against international law. Israel has to approve it or it can't be done. UN Resolution Charter, Article 80.
Let's talk a drop about, Bibi has said a number of times that the eighth front of these recent wars is the media. I'm curious, why do you think Israel, unfortunately, hasn't done as good a job should of fighting this war in the media?
We can't just blame the media. Israeli leaders, since I'm in this business for 32 years, they refuse to push back on the lies in any significant way. They're beginning now a trickle. They don't push back on the lie that it's Arab land, that we're killing their babies, that we're oppressing them. They're not pushing back that Abbas is a monster, or Arafat was a monster, Abbas is also a monster, that Arafat pays Arabs lifetime pensions to murder Jews. No one knows this, right? Speak on college campuses, and I say, do you know Abbas pays Arabs a lifetime pension to murder Jews? He spends $400 million a year. They start screaming at me, it's a lie. How can you say that? And I said, why do you call it a lie? Well, why isn't it all over the papers? Why aren't there our rabbis and other Jewish groups screaming about it? They're not. I have to take out my cell phone, look under Taylor-Force Act, which is the act that says we won't give you money if you pay Arabs to murder Jews, and read them the first sentence. And they're in shock. So Israel does not push back and demonize Abbas. They should demonize him as an impossible monster who's a Jew hater. And they don't push back on the statehood issue. Israel has offered the Arabs a state, listen to this, 8 times in the last 80 years, 8 times since the Peel Commission in 1937, and then in 1937, then in 1947, Resolution 181. They controlled all the land from 48 to 67. They didn't establish a state. And of course, Mort and Ehud Barak offered him a state in virtually all of Judea and Samaria and half of Jerusalem, and it was turned down. I asked Olmert, and no one remembers this, why did Abbas turn down your deal? Olmert offered them 97% of Judea and Samaria, 3% of Israel proper to make up for the 3% he can't give away because there are too many Jews living there,
Right.
and half of Jerusalem and billions of dollars in aid. And he said, Abbas said to me, this is a private conversation with me and Ehud Olmert. Abbas said to me, I'll do this deal. You got to get rid of 3 clauses. And Olmert says to me, he said, then which clauses? 1, we will never accept Israel as a Jewish state. Get the clause out. We accept Israel as a Jewish state. Never do it. Get rid of the clause that limits the number of Arabs we can bring into Israel proper to 150,000. We want no limits. Get rid of the clause that says no signing of this means there'll be no further claims on Israel. He says, I won't sign that. And Olmert said, he said to him, that's the deal. You're getting everything and it's over. Okay, now how many people know what I just told you? Nobody knows it. Israel should be using that to show and to make it clear. This is a big deal that Israel should make it clear. This Arab Islamic war against Israel is not about land. It's not about a state. They could have had a state 8 times in the last 80 years.
Right.
It's about Israel's destruction and killing Jews.
Yeah, they had Gaza. Gaza was a quasi-state.
Gaza was a quasi-state. So they had 100% of Gaza, as you mentioned. They had 40% of Judea and Samaria to this day. 40%. That's where 99% of the Arabs live. And the war continues because the issue is destroying Israel and killing Jews. It has nothing to do with the state or land. We have to end that. And why do Jewish leaders and even Jews still scream, give them a state? Because they can't bear the thought that it's about being a Jew and it's about destroying Israel. It's so painful. That means there's no resolution. So they will not accept that truth. And so they say, just give them a state. It's all about statehood. Because if it's about that, we can resolve it. But it's been proven 8 times in the last 80 years, it's not about that. And in answer to your question, Bibi and other Jewish leaders have not pushed back on genocide, apartheid, occupation, this lie of occupation. They don't push back. What do you expect? I'll tell you, when I've talked to the top Jewish leaders, the top Israeli leaders, in Israel, and mentioned this to them in long meetings, they've said to me either, don't teach me about public relations, I know how to handle it, or they say, Pushing back is not important. All that matters is we develop our high-tech industry. Israeli leaders don't get it. They're beginning to, because Bibi made a speech this week, 7-minute speech, short, saying all the things he should have been saying for years. So we need Jewish leaders and Israeli leaders to start pushing back on what a monster Abbas is, what a monster Hamas and the Gaza Arabs are, and that we're not going to deal with them. And it's not about land anyway. I don't see them pushing back. We're not demonizing the demons.
It's
and we should be.
I feel like you're a lonely man, like on an island, unfortunately. It seems that way.
But there's not if in February when I was with the Conference of Presidents in Israel, the first speaker that night was Michael Oren. Michael Oren is a liberal, he's a left-wing guy, a good speaker. He was ambassador from Israel to America, as you know. He gave a nice speech. Then he asked for questions. I raised my hand. He said, Mort, he called him me. Mort, before you ask your question, I want to acknowledge something in front of this whole group. Mort, you were right about everything. And I'm closer to your views now than I've ever been. He said it publicly at a meeting with all the heads of Jewish organizations. Mort, you were right about everything. A liberal guy saying that. Now, wouldn't you think that, I know everybody in that room, they're all my friends. Wouldn't you think one or two or three or more would come over to me afterwards and say something nice? Wasn't that nice of Warren to say that? Mort, he's right. You really were right. Wouldn't you think Malcolm Hoenlein sitting in that room, he's not employed anymore by the conference, but he still shows up. William Darrell is sitting in that room, all of them. Not a single person came over to me and said anything, despite this revolutionary statement by a liberal Jew in Israel that ZOA was right about everything. We've always been demonized as this extreme right. But again, truth is not a political position. Nobody came over to me.
Yeah, I would say the environment now is more ripe than ever before for embracing your philosophy and your.
But not the Jewish leaders.
I hear. All right, as we wind down this conversation, which has really been riveting, I just want to ask you one or two personal questions, if I may. I'm curious. I always like to ask my guests, tell me something about yourself that most people don't know about you. Just something interesting about you that most people don't know.
I was an all-city third baseman when I was 13 years old in Philadelphia.
Wow, okay.
I was really a very good baseball player, hit with power, ran like the wind in those days, very fast, that my coaches would say to me, remember, I was in a major Little League team in Philly. They would say to me, it's a shame, Mort, that you keep Shabbos, because I think you would have a chance to make the majors. Not that they're accurate, but they did say that they would say, it's a shame you keep Shabbos. He said, if you don't play Friday nights and Saturdays, they won't take you in the baseball team. So people don't know that I had the athletic prowess in baseball and other sports too. And that was a very fast runner. When we would have races in my neighborhood, I lived in all black neighborhoods. People don't know this. Until I was 16, my father was didn't earn a very good income. He was a rabbi of small synagogues in Philadelphia and poor synagogues. It was all black neighbors. When I would have races with my friends, all my buddies were black. That's my neighborhood. And we'd have races. I'd win. I'd always come in first against the black guys. And the black guys always say to me, Mort, you must have some black blood in you. You're too damn fast.
That's terrific. Final question. Just what concerns you most at the moment? Looking out at the Jewish world, what's your greatest concern?
By the way, you hear me making sounds. I have Tourette syndrome. It's a neurochemical disorder. I've had it since age 5. So that's the sounds that you hear, which unfortunately I can't control.
Interesting. How have you negotiated that condition throughout your life?
I ignore it. What else can I do? Although I will admit, the first woman who showed any interest in me, I married her immediately. I didn't want to be alone because I did have some very nice relationships with women who broke up with me because of my tics, my Tourette tics.
There was a famous basketball player that was a great basketball player in the day who had Tourette's. I can't remember his name right now.
Baseball, did you say?
Basketball, NBA player. He was
I don't know.
A guard, and I think he was at a Muslim name, actually.
Steve Carlton, the great pitcher of the Phillies, had Tourette.
Oh, okay, interesting. Okay.
One of the great pitchers.
Lefty.
Lefty, and a catcher for the Phillies who happened to be Jewish, Heimreich, something like that. I can't remember his exact name, had Tourette.
Interesting. But what is your greatest concern as we stand?
My greatest concern is Islam, and Islam taking over Europe. 10 to 15% of populations in the major countries in Europe are now Muslims. That is a factor in the leaders of those countries saying we support a Palestinian state. And Islam's goal is to take over the world. People refuse to accept that truth. So I'm worried about Islam. I'm worried about the fact that under Obama and Biden, several million Muslims came into America. Look, I have nothing against Hindus and Buddhists coming to America or Christians. because they don't wish us harm. So I'm not against Muslims because I'm against a different religion. I'm against them because all the surveys show, these are ADL's own surveys, that 75 to 95% of Middle East Muslims are anti-Semitic. 75 to 95% are anti-Semitic. The fact, because Obama and Biden brought in so many Muslims to America, the Muslim population has gone from like 1 million to 3.5 to 4 million in America. That's why we have reduced power in Capitol Hill, because now Muslims are lobbying. And now there's a Muslim constituency. And now you have Mamdani almost likely becoming mayor in New York. My biggest fear is radical Islam. And that's why we fought to stop Muslims from the Middle East to come to America. We were called Islamophobes. And I would always say that a phobia is an irrational fear of something. It is a rational fear when most Muslims hate Jews. That's rational for me to be afraid of them. And Hayas, by the way, almost all of their work is to bring Muslims to America. Do you know that? Hayas, who brought my own parents to America for years now, they don't do much for Jews. So my biggest fear is Islam taking more control in countries. And as al-Sisi said, the president of Egypt said a number of years ago in a major speech, there must be a revolution in Islam and must stop promoting hatred and violence against non-Muslims. Al-Sisi said it. He never said it again because he was condemned and attacked. He was afraid for his life. So that is my biggest fear, is Iran and their goals, and the goals of Islam is the biggest fear I have. And secondarily, and importantly, intermarriage. I'm deeply afraid that we're losing large numbers of our Jews because they're intermarrying. If you eliminate the Orthodox Jews in America, if you don't look at those numbers, the non-Orthodox, 75 to 80% marry non-Jews. 75 to 80, not 50, which is horrible enough. So I'm very worried that we're marrying ourselves out of existence, reduce power in America, intermarriage. We need to have a campaign among the Jewish groups to fight intermarriage and promote marrying Jews. When I made this resolution a number of years ago at the World Zionist Congress, as one of my resolutions that I proposed as a delegate, is that Jewish groups should work hard to promote Jews marrying Jews. It's a simple resolution. Jewish organizations should work to promote Jews marrying Jews. That's all it said. Didn't condemn intermarriage. It just said that. There was an uproar in the crowd. Abe Gaffney asked me if I wanted to withdraw it because people were screaming against it. And I said, no, let's have a vote. We had the vote. It lost. The Jewish delegates at the World Zionist Congress, which are the most Zionistic of all the Jews that are there in Israel, voted against having a resolution that said simply, Jewish groups should work to promote Jews marrying Jews.
Wow.
And so those are the things that I'm very concerned about.
Mort, thank you so much for your erudition, for your time, for your devotion to our people, Zionism. I look forward to working collaboratively with you in the coming months and years to strengthen our people and to strengthen the state of Israel. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your work, and I'm glad you left the law and now you've joined the fight for the Jewish people. We need all the talented hands we can get, and you're among them, and I appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm flattered.